All right, welcome everyone. I think we should get underway. I'm David Botel. Let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this event's taking place, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So I think everyone knows this is not the Penny Taylor oration that had been scheduled with Elise Cohn speaking. Unfortunately, Elise was not able to come out due to a family health emergency. And so fortunately today we have Dr. Claire Fedeli speaking about the importance of science communication. So just let me say a few things about the VCCC first. Bless you. And a few things about the VCCC, and then I'll introduce Claire, today's speaker. So I think most people know that the VCCC is a really powerful alliance of the precinct partners and beyond the precinct, I think of 10 partners. And the role of the VCCC is to really catalyse interaction between those partners and develop a strategic program that really integrates the research and makes best use of the wonderful resources that this new building and the other facilities in the precinct provide. I think that just as a housekeeping thing, that there's a number of forthcoming presentations that are up here on the screen. Erin, who's here at the front, can explain offline how best to register your interest in those and to take advantage of the program. So I would really encourage you to sort of, make use of these very interesting forthcoming presentations. So let me introduce Claire. So Claire is a rare individual who combines a passion for science communication with a really strong scientific background. So she trained as a biochemist, did her PhD in breast cancer research with Chris Mitchell out at Monash, and then excuse me, came to the Peter Mac precinct 8 years ago to work with Mark Shackleton on work on melanoma research. So during that time, Claire was awarded a NHMRC Early Career Fellowship. She has been, excuse me, a superstar of STEM. So she comes with this, really strong background in science, and as I said, brings that knowledge and experience to science communication. And as you'll hear today, there's probably never been a time when it's been more important for us to understand the significance of communicating our research to the wider public. I think it's fair to say we live in strange times where, there's such wonderful advancements in science generally, but in medical research particularly. And yet you see this rise of kind of a counterculture that seems to reject that, the anti-vaxxers, and I'm sure Claire will tell us of many about other examples, and the reasons, and go into the reasons for that sort of strange disconnect. So I think that it's beholden on all of us as researchers to understand how best to communicate with the public and to distill our complex questions into something that they can relate to, and really engage with the excitement and the promise of what we're doing. And so I think it's very timely and fortunate that Claire's willing to speak today and to jump into the slot that's been made available. So Claire, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, David. Okay, well, it is a pleasure for me to join you this afternoon. And let's see if this actually works. The joy of technology means that we don't, okay, we'll click through. Beautiful. All right, so as David told you, I'm here today to talk about this world that we live in and the movement that is sort of misinformation or anti-pseudoscience or anti-science and pseudoscience in the general public, and what we can do and what we should do as scientists and as researchers to try to combat this emergence and this rise in people who are trying to undermine what we do. And so I've called it Trust Me, I'm a Doctor, because I think we all used to think that this was true, that people would trust doctors and everything they would say, and that is now being challenged. So who am I to speak to you about this today? As David outlined, I am a researcher. I'm a cancer scientist. For the last 8 years, I've been at Peter Mac doing melanoma research. That means sitting in a lab and doing experiments to try to understand how melanomas change over time. But I wear a couple of different hats. I'm also a science communicator, and if you are unfortunate enough to be awake at 6:45 on a Monday morning, you might have heard me on ABC Breakfast Radio talking about the latest breakthroughs in medical research. I'm also a science communicator at Peter Mac, trying to tell the world the amazing things that we do here at the hospital. And April last year, I became a mum to my daughter, Frankie. So as a scientist and a mum and a science communicator, over the years, I've been quite shocked at the amount of anti-science and pseudoscience that I've been exposed to, especially as a mum, and especially on the internet and social media. And I felt compelled to act and do something about it. You know, as a scientist reading some of these things, my first instinct was to scream at people saying, no, no, no. What I quickly realized is that this was not effective. So how can we effectively counter the information that's out there? And I made it, or I'm making it, my mission to bring other researchers along with me on this journey to try to convince scientists and researchers that this is something not that we should be doing, but that we need to be doing, and it needs to be part of our job description, and it needs to be part of what we're assessed on for things like getting grants, because public money pays for our work. So with the emergence in the last, let's say 10 years of social media, we've seen a huge increase in these anti-science sentiments out there in the public. The development of the internet has really given people a platform and a voice in order to influence others, and people have really taken advantage of this. And we have seen over and over again a large number of people that are basically using their voice to try to influence as many people as possible, regardless of what it is that they have to say. And in order to really understand who it is that we're combating in terms of anti-science or pseudoscience out there in the community, I think we need to understand who these people are and what motivates them. So this is actually some data from a study that was published just this month in the journal Vaccine, that looked at a group of people who were posting anti-vaccination comments on a Facebook post about the HPV virus, vaccinations against the HPV virus. And what they found was that they could cluster or group these individuals who were making these anti-vaccination comments into 4 main categories in terms of their motivations. The first is a group of people who were focused on alternative or natural therapies. The second were the conspiracy theorists who were telling you that, or who believed that people were out to get them. The third were people who questioned the safety of these vaccines. And the last one, and an important one, is people who had lost trust in medical and science as industries in general. So this is really interesting, and I think it gives a beautiful insight into the fact that when we're talking about people who are spreading misinformation on social media, that they don't all have the same motivations and they don't all fall into the same categories. And that means that we can't kind of counteract them in the same way. We have to think about the fact that there are nuances to these people, and they are people and they have genuine concerns that we need to address. What was interesting in this study is that they found that the anti-vaccination, or people that had anti-vaccination sentiments, also tended to have these sentiments across disease groups, and that includes cancer. And I guess what we're talking about here today for BCCC, and me personally being a cancer scientist, is what kind of misinformation is being spread in the area or arena of cancer. So when we think about cancer, who are the people talking about these kind of alternate ideas? So the first is the scammers. So I hope I don't need to introduce you to Belle Gibson, who was touted as the most inspiring woman you've met, who claimed to have cured herself of terminal cancer, developed an app and became hugely popular on social media, made a lot of money that she was supposed to give away to charity and never did. She used social media to gain notoriety and also make money. So there are outright scammers out there who will try to prey on people and their perhaps in a time of weakness when they're suffering from a disease and they require hope. There are the conspiracy theorists. This is a Facebook page called Cancer Truth. And these are the two hosts of Cancer Truth. I don't know their names and I don't care to know their names. He has a tendency to wear ridiculous outfits. And this is a particularly cute way of spreading conspiracy. It's a festive themed conspiracy theories. And for the 12 days of Christmas, they had 12 conspiracy theories around cancer therapies. This is, of course, the cancer cure deception that relates to the lies being told to us as the public from Big Pharma with relation to cancer therapies. And there are the true believers. These are people who believe truly that they can use alternative therapies to help themselves and others. This is Jessica Ainscough. She was known online as the Wellness Warrior. She was diagnosed with a rare form of epithelioid cancer in her shoulder and for a short time received chemotherapy, but it didn't work and was advised by doctors to have her arm amputated. She refused that advice and decided instead to undergo a type of self-healing called Gerson therapy, which was daily caffeine enemas, dietary supplements and a vegetarian diet. And she claimed to have healed herself from her cancer. She gained a huge following on social media and she even wrote some books. Unfortunately, Jessica died of her cancer at the age of 30. Her mum, who was diagnosed with breast cancer and who also decided to take on the ideology of Jessica, died from her cancer 18 months before her daughter. And we don't know who else who has taken on the teachings of Jessica may have suffered because of it. But what we do know is that there are real implications to these things, and they're very sad implications. I myself got drawn into this world, interestingly, when last year I decided to escape the Melbourne weather and take my family, including my young daughter, somewhere sunny. So being a melanoma researcher, I was conscious that exposure to the sun in the early years is a risk factor for the development of skin cancer later in life. So I wanted to know whether I could put sunscreen on my young child. She was younger than 6 months. And on the side of all of the sunscreens, it says, do not put on your child younger than 6 months. So I went to Google and I wanted to know, was it safe for me to use sunscreen on my daughter? So I typed in to Google these words: is sunscreen safe? I should have nuanced it, is sunscreen safe for babies, but I didn't, and I went down a rabbit hole that I'd like to bring you along. So what was really comforting when I did this search was that, you know, this is page 1 of the results, by the way, was that most of them, at least initially, were coming up with reputable organisations, for example, the Cancer Council, saying, yes, it's all fine, sunscreen is safe, you don't have anything to worry about. But also on page 1 were a number of pages from bloggers, including Wellness Mama and another one called Thank Your Body, that had a different take on it. So I thought, okay, I could just ignore that, or I could click through. I clicked through. I clicked through to a page called Thank Your Body, who was run by a woman called Robin Coney. Robin Coney, among other things, is an avid researcher because she likes to read about nutrition. She's also apparently likes to hug walls. I found this photo very interesting. And so what did Robin have to say about sunscreen? And should I listen to Robin? Well, Robin decided that she really needed to let me know about the dirty secret about sunscreen, what we weren't being told. And she told me that the AMA quietly but definitively admitted, very emotive words, that an increased use of sunscreen is correlated with an increased incidence of skin cancer, which is may actually be true, but the thing is, there are nuances to this, and it's likely that this is because people who wear sunscreen are likely to spend more time out in the sun. That's one likely explanation for the correlation. But Robin says and admits that correlation does not equal causation, but still, common sense has got to tell you that slathering on chemicals can't be good for your health. Common sense, people. Still. Now, what does she say instead of wearing sunscreen? What should we do? Sunscreen's not safe, so what should we do to prevent skin cancer? We should get a tan. And so she says that it's important because the brown pigment melanin, so now she starts to use technical terms, the pigment melanin in our skin is a natural defense against skin cancer. This is true, but we shouldn't go out and get a tan in order to increase our levels of melanin. That doesn't work because when we go out into the sun, we increase our exposure to UV rays. But she references this article where she gets her information. She says, go to this article, it's great. I went to the article. Now, the article was written by this gentleman, Dr. McCullough. Dr. McCullough is an osteopathic doctor from the United States who has an online website and blog. And when you combine his English and Espanol Facebook pages, he has nearly 3 million followers on Facebook. He touts himself as an holistic doctor. So he combines natural medicines with conventional medicines in order to holistically treat people. When you look at the organisations that his website supports, you see a trend, and that is that Dr. McCullough supports other natural medicine websites and organisations, but also, interestingly, organisations that promote or are anti-vaccines, for example. So suddenly you have a wellness blogger who's referencing a doctor who's supporting anti-vaxxers. And I didn't have to go very far into Dr. McCullough's Facebook posts in order to find his referencing to our very own Paleo Pete Evans, who is, again, a wellness blogger, well-known chef who says that we should all be on a keto diet in order to keep ourselves healthy. So the reason why I went through this rabbit hole with you, I'm going to stop there, don't worry. I kept going, but I'll stop it with you, is to show you that what we're up against as researchers and as scientists, and not necessarily individuals. When you look at a blog, you might say, oh, well, Robin is just an individual. But she's not an individual. She's part of a network, and these networks are huge, and these networks have millions and millions of followers, and they all link to each other, and they all prop each other up. This is what we're up against. And what's interesting is that research has shown that people acquire their scientific knowledge by consulting others who share their values and whom they trust and understand. And this is a really, really important statement. This, when we think about how it's possible, how is it possible that, you know, these networks of people who are spreading this information, how is it possible that people aren't questioning them? How is it possible that they're propagating? And it's because that people out there see them as equals. They see them as sharing values with themselves. And this is quite different to how they see scientists. But what is this creating in our society? It's creating a society of post-truth, or what's called post-truth. Post-truth is a term that in 2016 the Oxford Dictionary had as its word of the year. It relates to circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than those appeals to emotion and personal belief. So this is what we're talking about. As scientists and researchers, we're focused on objective facts. But in 2019, we live in a post-truth society. These are that people are actually influenced by appeals to their emotion and personal beliefs. And this is where we need to start getting involved as scientists. We need to acknowledge that this is the world in which we live. And this is how people are making decisions, and this is how their opinions are being influenced. And so what can we do about it? Well, Facebook announced earlier this month that they are going to take steps to try to combat vaccine misinformation by pulling down sites that promote misinformation in the space of vaccine. So this is a big step. The other people doing it are YouTube are not removing content, but they are ceasing to promote content that is being shown to promote misinformation. So these big organisations are getting on board, seeing that this is an issue. But we need to do more. We as people, we as medical and health researchers need to do more. We need to add our voices to the fight. So how do we do this? Well, it's important, and I really enjoyed this quote from an article written a couple of years ago talking about, again, this need to counteract misinformation. But rather than just trying to stamp out misinformation or misunderstandings, we as scientists need to offer people something else to believe in. I was having a conversation with my brother on the weekend, and I was telling him that I was coming here today to give this talk, and the issues about social media and how we as scientists need to get online and counteract it. And my brother, who's a bit of a glass half full kind of guy, turned to me and he said, "Don't bother, you've got no chance." And I thought, you know what? He's right. He's right. We have left it too long. We're too late. This information is already out there. It's the people spreading it have gained too much popularity, and once it's been heard, it can't be unheard. There's no point scientists going online trying to, respond to every Facebook post from people spreading misinformation. It's not going to work. It's ineffective. So we need to change it up. We need to get out there and start giving some people something else to believe in. Which brings us to the idea or the concept of trust. We as health and medical researchers have begun to lose the trust of the public. And in order to get them back on board, we need to regain their trust. This is not an insignificant thing, regaining trust. How do we go about doing that? There are trust is a complex thing to gain, and there are many aspects to gaining trust. But I came across this really interesting equation actually when I attended a leadership course through the BCCC actually. I learned a great many things at this course, but this was the one thing that has stayed with me and resonated with me, was what's called the trust equation. And this is basically how we trust people. So we trust people based on their credibility, in addition to how reliable they are, in addition to how authentic and how they are and how warm they are, how much we relate to them as people. But what's really interesting is that all of that is undermined by this massive issue, and that is perception of self-interest. So if people think that we're out to get something, then all of these great things that we're doing on the top are just going to be divided by this perception of self-interest. So I'm going to go through these, I'm going to sort of break it down in terms of what we can do as scientists in order to increase trust. And I think, we have credibility and reliability in the bag. We're good for that. Where we lack and where we need to improve is in our perception of warmth, and this is a big one, our perception out there in the public of our self-interest. So let's talk about self-interest. So out there in the community, I think that there is a perception that researchers have something to gain, specifically financially, from our research. This is a post from, again, our mate Paleo Pete, saying that no doctoral degree can make a fool a wise human being, And this process is worsened by financial corruption. Human history provides enough examples that ordinary humans, how emotive is the language again, ordinary humans, the general public, need to fortify their intuition so that they're right, that guards their survival against traps set by greedy forces. So this is referring to researchers. This is referring to health and medical researchers. We are setting traps and we're greedy forces. I would like to today, for the record, counter some of these misinterpretations or misrepresentations. The reality of life as an academic, because the vast majority of medical research being done out there in the world is academic research. This is research being done in institutions such as universities and research organisations, research institutes such as Peter Mac here, WeHi next door. When you sign up to do a PhD, that's full-time study. You do not work in addition to this. You sign up to earning $30,000 a year for 3.5 to 4 years. Not exactly a great wage. Not only are you earning only $30,000, in that time, in that 3.5 to 4 years, you are losing potential income that you would be earning by going out and getting a job. That's all well. We do it because we have a passion for it, because we are driven by the research, because we believe in what we're doing and we believe that we're doing something for the greater good. So what do? We spend many, many years generating research tools and information that allow ourselves and other scientists around the world to answer more questions more effectively and faster. That's what we do. We then publish those results, but we don't get paid to publish those results. If you're an author of a book, for example, and you publish your book, the publisher might pay you some money. Fantastic. As a researcher, when we publish our results, we don't get paid money. In fact, quite the opposite is true. We have to pay the publishers and the journals in order to publish our research in those journals. We do not stand to gain anything financially from publishing. After it's published, we share that information and those resources that we've generated, in most cases for free. There are online repositories for data. We can submit things like DNA that we've generated that other people might want to use. We can submit those to an organisation called AdGene. People can go and apply to get that DNA of AdGene, and it's free. Someone might email us and say, hey, I really liked your paper. Can you please send me that mouse model that you took 3 years and however hundreds of thousands of dollars to generate? Can you please send it to me? And we will send it to them, in most cases, for free. We do not make money off these sorts of resources. And in most cases, when we do commercialize something, individual researchers are not listed as inventors on that product. And so as individuals, in most cases, we're not set to gain financially from even commercialization. On the other hand, let's look at these online people. Dr. Mercola has his own line of health supplements. Pete Evans has his own branded line of health supplements. And what about Jack Cruz, who made this statement? Well, Dr. Cruz is online too, and he sells his webinars on his alternative medicine, natural healing, for just $79 a pop. It's a bargain. So how is it that there are people online who are questioning the perceptions of self-interest of researchers when they themselves are quite clearly set to gain from those interactions? How are they getting away with it? And the answer really is this: warmth. They align themselves with their audience. They tell their audience that they're on the same page, that they're equals, that they share values with them, and they bring them along with them. We as scientists don't share that warmth. We are, through popular culture and through and often reluctance to step outside of the lab, step outside of our research and actually go and speak to people, we are perceived out there in the community as kind of being different to everybody else. We're seen as being cold, elitist, socially misfits, and that's really propagated by pop culture. The Big Bang Theory, for example. Look at how scientists are portrayed in The Big Bang Theory. I hate this show with a passion. My husband turns it on just to annoy me, and I refuse to watch it. But in particular, I just think I think what they're doing is really irresponsible. But in particular, look at the way that they've portrayed females in this show. The two females on either end are the scientists. Glasses, cardigans, demure stances, long skirts, black tights. In both cases, the non-scientist female here, sassy hand on hip, sexy hair, short skirt, no tights, showing a bit of leg. This is in its, when we laugh about it, but this is really a representation of how people see scientists and non-scientists in society. And they're perceiving scientists as being cold and disconnected, almost like a different species. Now, of course, Big Bang Theory itself is not only to blame. Young Sheldon has a lot to answer for. But how true is this when we out there in the world? Because we can make perceptions about how we think people see scientists. Well, a study has actually addressed this. And this study, published in PNAS a couple of years ago now, asked people in the general public to rate people of different occupations in terms of their competence, shown here along the x-axis, and their warmth, shown here along the y-axis. So somebody who was deemed to be more competent will appear further along the x-axis, and somebody who was warm would appear up here, higher up on the y-axis. So people who are both competent and warm sit, or professions rather, sit here in the top right quadrant. And we see that we have nurses up here and teachers and doctors and professors, and that's wonderful. So take a minute to think where, I've actually removed the researchers and scientists. I've removed those data points from this plot. So where do you think scientists and researchers fit in terms of this plot?
High in competence and low in warmth.
Okay, yeah, high in competence, low in warmth. So they sit here, high on competence, very high on competence. And not the lowest. I mean, we're not kind of at prostitute level, but I mean, and we're not quite at lawyer level, let me say. But we are the lowest out of all of the healthcare and health-related professions. And we sit in this very interesting cluster that the researchers called the envied professions. So what does that mean, to be an envied professional? They found that envied professions earn respect but not trust. And this is an issue for us because we need to be earning trust. We do want to be earning respect, but we want to be earning trust as well. People report envy and jealousy towards groups in this space. They're mixed emotions that include both admiration and resentment. What's interesting is that they even said that people were not or felt not unhappy when something kind of bad happened to people that fit into the envied professions. For example, they weren't unhappy when someone in an envied profession sat on chewing gum, and they weren't unhappy when someone in an envied profession got splashed by water as a car drove past. So there's kind of, it's a weird, it's a weird space to be in as a scientist, to think that people out there in society kind of have a little bit of resentment against us. So how do we counteract this? How do we earn back the trust? Well, the research showed, and the authors suggested, that scientists whose jobs involve teaching and communicating would seem warmer and more trustworthy, seeming to show worthy intentions. So here's our in. Here's how we can really make a difference. Let's get better at teaching and communicating. And the public, hopefully, will see us as being warmer and more trustworthy. So how do we, as scientists, effectively communicate? I've broken down what I believe are the elements of effective communication into 3 distinct elements. I've represented them by elements on the periodic table because science. So the 3 elements of effective communication are: the first is represented by the chemical symbol for gold, which I think is quite fitting because it relates to audience. Chemical symbol for gold is AU, by the way. Who are you trying to reach? We need to understand who it is that we're actually speaking to so that we can understand what motivates them, who they are, and what is important to them. Otherwise, we're just saying messages to people that they don't care about. The second is represented by the symbol for beryllium, and that is be authentic, be warm, show some personality. Show people that we as scientists and researchers are not a different species. We're just like everybody else. We're passionate, we're interesting, and we care, and we're not in it for self-gain. And the third element is represented by the element of copper, and that is to customize your narrative. Don't say the same, or don't tell the same message over and over again to different people, because they're not going to understand it. There's no point getting out there and talking about your research if nobody has any idea what you're talking about. We need to change our message and customize it depending on who we're speaking to and where we're speaking. So who are we speaking to? What do we want to say? And why do we want to say it? So very briefly, I'm just going to go through some basics about how we can integrate these 3 elements as scientists to try to more effectively communicate with the public. And the first is understanding our audience. This is a really, I think, important slide because it tells you that the message going in can be split into many, many different messages coming out depending on who you're speaking to. And at the end of the day, we need to address this question of so what. We need to make people care about what it is that we're saying. Because they're sitting there going, they're trying to listen to you, saying, so what? How does this relate to me? Why should I care about what it is that you have to say? And so I think it's important that we understand how our message can change and who we're speaking to. So for example, a policy, if you're speaking to a policymaker, their motivations and what is important to them is very, very different to, for example, speaking to media. A policymaker wants to know whether this supports or refutes their legislation and whether or not their voters actually care about an issue. So if you're going out there wanting to speak or wanting to change policy, and you're going out in there and speaking to somebody in government, you need to tell them why it's important to their constituents that they make a change. Because unless you can convey that, you know, their responsibility is as a representative of their constituents. Unless you convey how it's going to help them, they're not going to care. But that message is very, very different to, for example, if you want to speak to the media. They want to know, is it news? Will it sell? Will people click on it online? That's a very, very different message that you need to sell people in the news. The public, why does this matter to me? Why does it matter to my loved ones? How is this going to affect my life? So these are all very different messages. So again, we need to understand what's important and what motivates each of these different audiences and change our message accordingly. The second one is be authentic. This means show people who we are. Show that we are diverse, that we are passionate, and that we're real people. So how can we do that? Well, it's interesting that the easiest place to start is really on social media. And there are lots of different ways that we can do it. But one in particular is on Instagram, and there's a really great hashtag called #ScientistToSelfie. And you can go on Instagram and basically people, these are scientists, will basically post photos of their everyday life. And what's amazing is you can see the diversity in what it is to be a scientist in real life. You can see that it's men, it's women, it's people working in the field, it's people working in labs, wearing tiaras, and it gives people an insight into what you do on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, at the end of the day, what this shows you is that you are a person and not a robot. People are interested in other people. Who are they? What do they do? What do they get up to? A lot of people, you know, they say to me, what do you do? Like on a day-to-day basis, what is it that you do? And I have to explain to them that I go in and I put on a lab coat and I sit at a lab bench and I do experiments, and that means that I, you know, pipette things into, I use an instrument called a pipette, and I add things into cells in a culture dish and I see whether or not it makes a difference. That's one thing. So we need to convey that message. What is it that we do on a day-to-day basis? Because that's what people find interesting. And it endears people to us. They can see that we're just people like everybody else. On Twitter, there's a hashtag called #SciComm. This is another great way of engaging with people on Twitter and presenting science in a really accessible way. So you can show photos of what you do in the lab and you can #SciComm. People can search for that hashtag and access all this really beautiful and amazing scientific content. So these are certainly places to start, and social media is a wonderful place in order to get your message across to potentially a huge number of people. But how effective is it at the end of the day, and how much can we rely on it? And I think we have to be really cautious as scientists in relying on social media to convey our messages because of this result that's just come out of the latest 3M State of Science Index survey for 2019. And they asked the questions, different questions relating to the perception of science in the community. 15,000 people, they had 15,000 respondents across 14 different countries. And one of the questions was, when you read or hear something about science from each of the following sources, this is just a few of the sources, are you more likely to be skeptical of it or believe it? And what's really interesting is that when they hear the science, when the source is the scientists themselves, the vast majority, 80%, said that they would believe it. So when they hear it directly from a scientist, they believe it. When they hear it from a documentary or friends and family, they believe it too, but to a lesser extent. But what's really interesting is when they responded about social media posts, actually a huge number of people, the vast majority of people, were skeptical about science through social media. That's really interesting because anti-science is prolific on social media. And it just goes to show that we can't be using this kind of retaliation against anti-science on social media because people may not believe it. They may actually be skeptical of it. So what do we need to do? We need to actually get out there and speak to people. This is what the statistic tells us. We need to get out there in front of people and have discussions with them. And this can be going out and doing school visits. It can be speaking to public groups or clubs. It can be volunteering to do public tours at your research institute. Whatever it is, it's about getting in front of people and so that people are getting their information directly from you as a scientist. What's really fantastic is that people are acknowledging this, and there are a number of kind of more organized things happening to try to get scientists to coax them out of the lab and into the public forum. And there's some really great initiatives. The first one is called Skype a Scientist. And what's really fantastic about this is that you can be a scientist anywhere in the world on a computer. And what Skype a Scientist does is it puts you in front of kids in front of school kids. So there'll be a whole class of kids gathered around the computer or the screen, and you'll be Skyping with them. What a wonderful initiative to get a scientist linked with school kids. It means that you or we here in Australia can be speaking to school kids anywhere in the world. It's a wonderful initiative. Pint of Science is another really interesting idea, and that is taking scientists, again, out of the lab and putting them in the pub and getting them to talk about their science over a beer, over a pint, And this is a worldwide initiative that happens in May. And it's happening in Australia, and it's happening in Melbourne mid-May. Again, it's about taking scientists out of this kind of segregated, isolated environment, which is in the lab, taking them out of that, putting them into a social context where there are non-scientists, and it's an informal way of getting scientists to speak with people, to show them again that we are warm people, we're not scary, we're not social misfits, we can communicate with people. And so we, again, the intention is about building warmth as a scientist. But of course, when we're doing all of these activities, we need to remember the third element, which is really important, and that is to customize our narrative. There's no point going out and talking to school kids if you don't know how to speak to them, or if they don't understand what you're trying to say. We need to work on being able to break down complex issues and complex topics into ways that people can understand them, into simplified ways that people can understand what they mean and how they relate to it, to themselves. But as scientists, this is actually really hard. It's really hard to keep this balance, because while we need to get really, really good at simplifying and making our research less complex, we need to keep in mind the trust equation, and that is that credibility is actually still really important. So we need to reach an equilibrium, a balance of being relatable so that people can understand what it is that we're trying to say, but also maintaining our status as an expert. So we can't go too much in the other direction and lose our credibility by, you know, what's called dumbing down, which I hate that term, but by making our research so unlike the actual truth that we lose our credibility. And this takes a huge amount of practice. And why it's, and the fact that it takes a lot of practice means that we as scientists should be really encouraged to be doing this on a day-to-day basis. It should be part of what we do as our job. And at the end of the day, really what I think scientists have a responsibility to do is to change this cartoon. So this is a cartoon basically depicting science versus everything else. The everything else is a very straightforward path. It's simple but wrong in terms of answers. Here is the path that scientists generally take. It's complex but correct, but it's too hard to bring people along that path. The path is too winding. It's not straightforward enough. We have a responsibility as scientists to simplify this path, to make it a bit straighter, so that we can bring these people along with us, along the complex but right path, and not have to have them winding their way through and losing them along the way. So I think this, as scientists and as researchers, this is our challenge. Our challenge is to make this path straighter. And I think that if we can do that and create really, really engaging content that people can interact with and believe in, that we will start to, and this will only be a start, we will start to counter a lot of the misinformation and a lot of the negativity that is out there in the community about what it is that we do. It's critically important. And I think that institutes and organisations and funding bodies need to incentivise scientists and researchers to get out there and speak to the public, to make it part of an accessible way of determining the impact of a scientist on our community, is how well we communicate it out there in the world. Oops, and that's it. That's the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that for the scientists out there, I've convinced you that this is something worthwhile, and for members of the general public, that I can show you that scientists are real people, and we're not scary, and we're not from another planet. I'd love to take some questions, or even have a general discussion if there's no questions. There is a question over here, but I'd love to have a discussion about this in this forum.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. I wanted to ask you about what you thought about
counteracting these emotive stories that we hear all the time, these anecdotal stories with anecdotal stories from people or from scientists, not necessarily to create that sense of warmth, but to create a sense of like, well, this person, I don't know, an example that maybe is not the best that comes to mind is this person tried, you know, these alternative treatments and it didn't go well for them, you know, or other emotive things that are maybe positive.
I think that, so it's a really great question for you to look. Sorry, I have to stand here, do I? The really, so it's a great question about how we as scientists use emotion. And I think that there are risks involved with it, but I think that it's important that we do it. So I think that in terms of using emotion as a scientist, we need to use emotion to emotionally connect with people, to tell people that we share their values. But we need to be very careful about becoming too emotional in terms of trying to counteract the information that's already out there. So if we become emotionally involved in a debate online, let's say, for example, on Facebook, if we become emotionally involved in that, we actually run the risk of being seen as more cold and as trying to, and we run the risk of being perceived as elitist, and that we know more than everybody else. And that is, and that's it's a very fine balance for us as scientists as to how we can actually engage in these sorts of conversations without appearing like we're preaching and that we're right and you're wrong and you don't know anything and we're, you know, and you should trust us. So, you know, whether or not we should be out there with our own anecdotes that are emotive, my belief is that's not the way that we're really going to be able to make an impact. That the way we're going to be able to make an impact is to positively, put a positive spin on what we do, and to positively give people something, as I said earlier, something else to believe in that is not, you know, the pseudoscience, and that we're not kind of just acting as a reflection of what's already out there.
Maybe in sharing the wins, we have these breakthroughs, and that's really exciting, and maybe these emotion that comes through is the emotion on the side of the scientist. So I'm really excited to help people with this.
Absolutely, I think absolutely, and we as scientists, I mean, if you actually speak to scientists are hugely passionate. It's quite amazing, because scientists are passionate, they're dedicated, they work their butts off to try to make small incremental advances in our knowledge. And what's really interesting is that we are collectively really passionate, but we just have a real problem getting that passion across to the general public, and we need to get better at getting that out there.
I think one thing when you're being challenged or, you know, attacked even about your scientific views, it's very important to treat disrespect with respect. It really, you know, there's a tendency to want to escalate it, but I think that's a very unsuccessful strategy.
Yeah, it will just reinforce what they already believe, that you're cold.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. Every year I go to a talk called the Nobel Awards.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that these are expert scientists that talk in their own field, and they have the opportunity of presenting their information in 3 minutes. But if they use a word or a term that is not familiar to the rest of the audience, the little bell goes. It's amazing how little of their presentation actually gets through.
Gets through, yeah.
The other thing is to talk about passion. I've been to many conferences where people present their posters. Their passion is obvious, but their ability to present that information, and I'm a trained scientist as well, and I'm interested, and I keep on saying, slow down. What does, you know, that term? They are so wound up in their own area that they have lost the ability to actually present it.
Absolutely. Yeah, great comment. And that's what we're trying to counteract, really. It's to try to, you know, it's again about the 3 elements. It's audience, showing personality, but also changing your message depending on who it is that you're speaking to, and knowing what that person and what's important to that person. and so that you can actually get through, so that your message can actually get through and make an impact on whoever it is that you're trying to speak to.
Yeah, I just following on from that comment, I'd actually rehired Consumer Buddy. And part of what we have to do is help our scientists communicate what they're talking about. Have you discovered the Wired magazine 5 Levels video series? This is a series of videos, there's about half a dozen of them, where an expert in their field has to explain what they do to a 5-year-old, a child, a junior high school student, graduate, undergraduate, a graduate, and a peer. So it's from, if you just Google Wired, 5 Levels video series. There's one on quantum computing. Mind you, I couldn't understand the explanations for the 5-year-old. Biology, neuroscience. It gives an example of how people are doing this kind of communication for different audiences at different levels.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to carry on from the consumer perspective. I'm a project officer here in the cohort division, but I'm also a consumer advisor at Mercy Hospital for Women. And I just wanted to highlight the advantages of getting consumers involved in grants and projects early on in lots of different ways. The buddy program at Lehigh is hugely successful, and I just think that perhaps the top-down approach to getting consumers involved early on is maybe the key to opening up those conversations.
Absolutely. I think, and the importance of bringing in consumers at the start of the process. So as researchers, we have tendency to kind of get excited, get ahead of ourselves and do what we believe is important. But as usually or commonly publicly funded researchers, we have a responsibility to do research that is important to the public and to consumers, to people who are actually invested in the research. And so it is actually a really important and a part of the process, and it should come in at the very beginning, at the pre-planning stage of what it is that we're actually going to research, so we know what we should be researching and what's important to the public. And I think that that we're getting better at doing it. Funding bodies are now asking for consumer involvement and evidence that we're consulting consumers in our research process. And I think that that's going to get more and more important.
Claire, while you were talking, I was thinking of, why does it matter if someone wants to take coffee enemas? Why should we really care about how it turns out for them? But if you think about the most serious failure of science policy over the last couple of decades, it's been around climate change.
Yes.
Which has immense implications. Do you think that things could have been done better there in communicating that story? I think,
so climate change, it's, well, I mean, I don't know whether, it's a massive debate about how to actually communicate around climate change, and I don't know whether I'm in a position to be able to make a definitive statement about how they could have improved it. It's not been massively effective. We've seen that, and there's a huge issue with misconceptions in the community about climate change, and again, it falls on mistrust, a lot of it, and that is that although the vast majority of scientific consensus shows that there is evidence for climate change, and that's human, that's been induced by the use by humans, there is still, a small fragment of doubt in that research, and there's mistrust around the research that does exist. And I think as scientists in addressing this issue of doubt, we have to get better at communicating the fact that as scientists we always have doubt, and it doesn't mean that we're wrong or that we don't believe in what we're showing, but we as scientists will always have an element of doubt in what we do. And we need to get really good at conveying the importance of doubt and the fact that and this idea of weight of evidence, that that we can't ever say 100% conclusively, but the weight of evidence suggests that this is what's happening. And that doesn't mean that we're not sure or that we don't know what we're talking about, but it's just that we're always going to be conservative as scientists. And that is really what sets a scientist apart from somebody who's just spreading misinformation is an acknowledgement on the scientist's part that there is always an element of doubt in everything that we do, but it doesn't mean that we're wrong.
Thanks. My name's Ian Blair. I'm an agriculturalist. Hi, I'm Ian Blair. I'm an agriculturalist. Thanks for a fantastic talk. But one thing that came through for me is that both David Attenborough and Jane Goodall combine all the warmth and credibility and so forth. And I just wonder whether it's worth adding them in. You have the rabbit holes of negatives, but have a few rabbit holes of positives that would illustrate your talk, because they embody everything that you've covered. Thank you very much.
They do. Thank you so much for that comment. I will absolutely take that board. You're 100% right. I should have had good examples. It's not all, you know, it's not a lost hope. There are wonderful examples of people doing this type of thing all the time. And for my next talk, I will absolutely add in some references to the ones that are doing a great job. Thank you for that comment.
Okay, on that positive note, I think we should draw things to a close. And thank you again, Claire, for a really wonderful talk.
Thanks for having me.